We're living in interesting times, and these are very difficult times. There's been an escalation in global conflict, we've all seen that, and it feels like there's been a breakdown in international law, particularly human rights law. Or perhaps it's just a period where we are seeing a more blatant demonstration that international law has always had a principle that some matter more than others. And perhaps we just didn't realize it. On this continent, we've had an increase in conflict as well. Over the past 1 year, there has been a 14% increase in forcibly displaced people in Africa. In 1 year, a 14% increase. There are 45 million forcibly displaced people in Africa today. This is dire. I want to come to each of the panelists to start us off just with an overview from where you sit. When we talk about securing Africa's future, when we talk about security and peace for the continent, for the nations, and for our people, what are you seeing? And what are the priority areas we must address? You started us off, Your Excellency Moussa Faki, this morning on this issue. Let me come to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. I'm going to speak in French. Je voudrais d'abord constater quelque chose. Cette salle dans laquelle nous nous trouvons, ici à Kigali, a servi à la signature de la zone de libre-échange continentale. Tout un symbole. Parce qu'en 1963, quand l'OIE a été créée, les pères fondateurs ont mis l'accent sur un marché africain commun. Nous lançons aujourd'hui ISCA dans cette salle. C'est tout un symbole. Vous avez parlé que l'Afrique aujourd'hui regorge du nombre le plus important de déplacés et de réfugiés. Moi-même, il y a 40 ans, j'ai été réfugié. J'ai quitté mon pays à cause de la guerre. Si je regarde ce qui se passe dans ce pays, le président Kagame a dit quitter enfant son pays à cause des problèmes. Il est revenu pour diriger ce pays. Et en 30 ans, nous avons constaté ce qui a été fait. Donc vraiment, sur le plan du symbole, je suis particulièrement fier de l'événement, du moment choisi et du lieu. C'est pour dire que les problèmes de sécurité en Afrique ne sont pas nouveaux. Par contre, aujourd'hui, la nature et l'envergure de conflit a changé dans le monde et particulièrement en Afrique. Nous nous sommes, en tant que continent, donné un certain nombre de moyens, notamment juridiques. Nous avons une architecture pour la paix et la sécurité. Mais le constat aujourd'hui est que nous ne sommes pas arrivés à rétablir la paix et la sécurité. Pourquoi? C'est une grande interrogation et c'est tout l'intérêt d'une structure comme l'ISCA pour pouvoir y réfléchir en profondeur, en se détachant peut-être un peu des contingences qui sont celles des gens qui sont aux affaires. Je disais hier soir à ma sœur Louise que je suis devenu un homme libre, parce que quand on est dans l'action, il y a une certaine obligation de réserve, même si on quitte sa fonction, ça existe, mais ça permet au moins de réfléchir, de par son expérience, essayer peut-être de prospecter d'autres voies pour pouvoir arriver à une solution. Vous l'avez dit, le droit international lui-même, qui a été construit, commence à être violé par ceux-là même qui l'ont mis en place et qui en détiennent pratiquement le monopole. Ça, c'est une grande interrogation. Quand on voit ce qui se passe aujourd'hui dans le monde, ce qui se passe à Gaza, ce qui se passe en Europe, ce qui se passe en Afrique, il y a de quoi s'interroger. Et je crois, en tant que continent, c'est une question de responsabilité. Le président Kagame l'a dit tout de suite, il faut s'approprier, il faut même imaginer, par rapport à ces réalités, quels sont les chemins qui doivent nous conduire à la paix et à la stabilité qui puissent permettre le développement. C'est l'enjeu principal et je crois qu'il y a beaucoup à dire sur ces sujets. Merci.
Thank you so much for that. Ambassador Kimani, let me come to you next, please.
Thank you very much, Julie. It's such an honor being here in Kigali and to see many friends of mine in the audience. And I want to say how tremendous it is to sit here in a conference for Africa by Africa. And it gives us that latitude to think freely and to not have to answer to any other interests except our own. And this is more rare than it would appear because the troubles that Africa is facing are both made from within our own contradictions internally, in the structure of the African state, in the incentives of the political class, and the levels of competence that are available in terms of governing. And it is also the interaction with global forces and with actors who seek to intervene in different ways, whether it be political, commercial, or security. Perhaps the most benefit in terms of this particular remark is to build on our former chairperson's remark on responsibility. Julie, for the 2 years I recall being in the UN Security Council, I was exposed to many files, many African files as they're treated in the Security Council. And what I discovered is that to be free and to be secure is extremely demanding. As a government and as the leaders of governments, you need to have extreme levels of attentiveness, strategic thinking, and a complete rejection of domination of your mind and your intentions. And you have to do that not once in a while, you have to do that every single day. The sheer pressure to be competent and to be independent is overwhelming. And that is why the most necessary measures we need to take in the next coming years is to essentially begin to reshape the incentives of leadership and to raise a new generation of African leaders who are ready to stand in the pressure room. Because to lead your country in Africa towards security and towards prosperity requires special qualities that few single people have. It is usually groups of people. And how to produce them, how to motivate them, how to incentivize them, how to identify them and develop them is the most pressing challenge that we have today.
Wow, that's incredibly powerful. And I'm going to just repeat that, a new generation of African leaders who are ready to stand in the pressure room. And experts, enough experts to put the attention on the issues, on the documents, on the positions, on the scenario building, on the collaboration and the alignment that needs to take place. It's sort of like an army of young people who are capable from the continent of doing this at country level, at regional level, and then I guess at global level. Very, very interesting. Victor,
but perhaps
yes.
Sorry, I don't want to hang my hat on expertise.
Okay.
There's plenty of expertise to go around. But a lot of it is performative expertise. We need expertise that is rooted in political will, and political will that is rooted in political incentives. And this requires simply a revolution in leadership, and then the expertise will follow, and it'll flow naturally.
Before I leave you on that, you talk about the incentives. What do these incentives look like? If we talk about action-oriented solutions, give us an inkling of what these might look like.
Well, the African state was never built to succeed. It was never built to deliver independence or prosperity to Africans. So when we took it over, there was ambitions to transform it, and by transforming the state, transform the citizen. I saw a phrase once describing the Kenyan state that said, Kenya is a state is a government chasing nationhood. We believed that by transforming the state, we could transform the citizen. We had big dreams. Those dreams have narrowed ever since. We now are mostly in the mode of survival. And I think one of the lessons I have that tells me that it is entirely possible is sitting right here in Kigali.
Right.
Because we have seen Rwanda rise from a state whose incentives were the destruction of its population, were the perpetrating of hatred, the weaponization of identity, and incompetence, and moved steadily under a different group of people to embrace competence and delivery and responsibility. So it's possible. It's imminently possible. It's only a question of us taking the examples that are there and trying to be copycats.
Thank you for that. Victor, let me come to you next. China has gone through an incredible evolution over the past few decades. It seems to have been very intentional, very strategic. But give us an overview. When you look at the geopolitical pressures and how they impact Africa, what are you seeing? And are there lessons in what China has done that you can share with the world and perhaps Africa could just take a look at?
Thank you very much, Julia. Your Excellencies, Generals, Officers, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor to attend today's inaugural session of ISCA. It's my first visit to this great country of Rwanda, but I'm sure it will not be my last. Just like all of you, I listened very carefully to His Excellency President Kagami's important speech. I cannot agree with him more when he said, African security cannot be outsourced. I think President Kagame is not only a great leader of Rwanda, he's a great leader of Africa, and is a great statesman in the world of today. Now, when you say you cannot outsource security to other countries, in a sense, it means Africa needs to use your own brain power to make up your own judgment. In the world of today, you hear a lot of talks about whether, Africa should be forced to make a choice between China versus the United States. I think that's the wrong choice. The real choice for Africa, as well as for the rest of mankind, is whether the United States is doing the right thing or is doing the wrong thing, or whether China is doing the right thing or doing the wrong thing. If the United States is doing the right thing, work with the United States. But if the United States is doing the wrong thing, why should you bother about working with the United States or following its leadership? Similarly, if China is doing the right thing, why don't you want to work with China? And, God forbid, if China is doing the wrong thing, why should you work with China? That means African countries, people in Africa, need to use their own brain power to make a decision first, whether this country or that country is doing the right thing or the wrong thing. Don't be forced by any other country to make a choice which will not serve your fundamental interest. Now, when I traveled a little bit in Rwanda yesterday, in Kigali, let me tell you my real observation. I think Kigali is in better shape today compared with China back in 1978, when China started to reform and opening to the outside world, attracting FDI into China. The philosophical point I want to emphasize is that if China can do this in 46 years, Rwanda and Africa can do it in the coming 4 decades or so. Have faith in yourself. Keep faith in yourself. China is a success story which can be repeated by the great people here in Rwanda and the great people here in Africa. Now, another piece of advice. What is the foundation upon which security should be based, not only for Rwanda but for Africa? Security never exists in a vacuum. Security should be based on several things, which are the pillars. One is maintain stability at home. The other one is keep peace with your neighbors. And the third one, as Deng Xiaoping, for whom I had the great honor to work with before, development is the hard truth. Develop, develop, develop. In that context, whichever country which can really help you to achieve your development goal, he should be a friend. But don't be diverted. Don't be confused by some other country coming to you, say, no, let's put a premium on certain other things, on values, etc. And I do not want to build a bridge or a highway or a railway or a power station in your country. But if those countries which build these infrastructure projects in your country, they are not really meant good for you. No, that's not the truth. Decide with yourself, use your own judgment as to which countries are really helping you to beef up infrastructure connectivity, your manufacturing capabilities, and in the African context in itself, power generation. You need power, you need to generate power. I understand, even in this great country of Rwanda, you may not have sufficient amount of power. Focus on that, get that done. That will provide a much better context, whereby security for Rwanda, security for Africa as a continent will be better reinforced. Thank you.
Wow. Excellent. Very, very practical, pragmatic. I love the, stability at home, peace with your neighbor, develop, develop, develop. It feels though a lot of the world is moving away from that, and there's a real interest-based, almost bullying, temperament coming into diplomacy, right? But we'll come back to that. And Mark, first, let me come to you for your thoughts.
Thank you, Julie, and many thanks to the organizers of this conference. I'm really honored and humbled.
Please go a bit closer to the mic.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Is it better?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm really honored and humbled to be here today, and I would like to thank warmly the organizers. I prepared a few talking points in English, but then I realized that Her Excellency Louise Mushiki-Wabo was sitting at the first row. She's the General Secretary of the Francophonie, so I guess that would be a diplomatic issue if I would continue in English. So let me switch to French. And I don't want to get into trouble with you. La notion de sécurité qui est dans le titre de ce panel peut être comprise de différentes manières. Et on a beaucoup parlé là de sécurité humaine, en fait. Mais il y a aussi une partie de la sécurité qui est plus liée à la défense, et je vois que dans cette salle, il y a beaucoup d'uniformes d'officiers supérieurs et d'officiers généraux. Et donc ma première réaction quand j'ai préparé ces quelques remarques, c'était de me plonger sur les questions plus de sécurité liées à la défense. Et ce qu'on constate, c'est qu'au cours des dernières années, on a vraiment changé de cycle stratégique. On est passé d'un cycle stratégique qui a duré 20 ans, de 2001 à 2021, 2022, qui, du point de vue de plusieurs pays occidentaux, et notamment la France, était vraiment orienté sur la lutte contre le terrorisme. Du côté des États-Unis, ça a donné la guerre globale contre le terrorisme. Et c'était vraiment très visible dans les documents de doctrine, dans les documents de stratégie, notamment dans la National Security Strategy aux États-Unis et en France dans la Revue nationale stratégique. C'est-à-dire que la focalisation était sur des sujets liés à la menace terroriste, ce qui faisait que le continent africain avait une place très importante parce que des groupes djihadistes s'y étaient développés et que la France et d'autres pays alliés, notamment d'autres pays européens qui ont participé par exemple à la task force Takuba, ces pays-là étaient impliqués pour la sécurité du continent. La période a changé. La période a changé autour de 2021-2022. Ça a été matérialisé pour les États-Unis par le retrait d'Afghanistan, le retour au pouvoir des talibans, et pour la France par la fin de l'opération Barkhane et le départ de plusieurs pays d'Afrique, départ militaire. Ce qui est arrivé par la suite, c'est un cycle stratégique qu'on appelle celui de la compétition de puissance ou de la compétition stratégique qui est beaucoup plus orienté sur la compétition entre États et notamment entre grandes puissances. Et le fait est que pour le continent européen, mais également pour les États-Unis, l'Afrique est devenue moins centrale du coup. Le regard s'est beaucoup plus tourné vers l'Est vers la Russie pour ce qui est de l'Europe et pour les États-Unis beaucoup plus vers la Chine. Ça, c'était mon premier point, c'est qu'il y a eu un changement de paradigme dont il faut tenir compte. Mon deuxième point, c'est que la sécurité, qui encore une fois figure dans le titre de ce panel, peut être conçue aussi comme un marché politique, un marché parfois économique aussi, avec une offre et une demande. Du côté de la demande, cela a été exprimé clairement ce matin, l'idée n'est plus d'externaliser la sécurité. Du côté de l'offre, je crois aussi que ce qui s'est passé au cours des dernières années a pu refroidir certains États et qu'il y a moins de volonté aujourd'hui de s'impliquer militairement de manière lourde dans des affaires qui, au premier chef, concernent les États africains et ont trait à leur souveraineté en premier lieu. Donc je dirais que du point de vue de l'offre et de la demande, ça a tendance à s'aligner, mais vers une implication sans doute moins grande, encore une fois sur les questions de sécurité dure liées à la défense de ces puissances extérieures. Le troisième point que je voudrais mentionner brièvement, c'est que le thème de ce panel est non seulement sur la sécurité de l'Afrique, mais dans un monde fragmenté. Et effectivement, ce qu'on constate, c'est un monde qui est de plus en plus multipolaire, avec des blocs géopolitiques qui ont tendance maintenant à être en compétition. Et ce qu'il faut voir, c'est que la sécurité de l'Afrique est aussi liée à la sécurité d'autres parties du monde, et que certains conflits qui ont lieu en dehors d'Afrique ont un impact direct sur le continent. Je pense évidemment notamment au conflit en Ukraine, qui a eu des conséquences en termes de sécurité humaine, on l'a vu avec les questions alimentaires par exemple, mais également dans un domaine de sécurité ou de défense plus dur. J'ai en tête par exemple un échange que j'ai eu avec un ministre d'un pays d'Afrique de l'Ouest quelques mois après le déclenchement de l'invasion à grande échelle de l'Ukraine par la Russie, et il m'expliquait à quel point il était difficile pour lui d'acquérir un certain nombre de capacités militaires critiques dans la lutte contre le djihadisme parce que la focale était désormais davantage pour les pays occidentaux sur l'aide militaire à l'Ukraine. Et ça avait un effet d'éviction pour son pays. Le dernier point que je souhaite mentionner très brièvement, c'est que cette ère de compétition géopolitique peut être un piège pour beaucoup de pays et que je pense qu'il s'agit d'éviter de passer d'une influence externe à une autre. Ça a été dit ce matin, maintenant il s'agit sans doute de le mettre en pratique, et puis de diversifier les partenariats plutôt que d'avoir une approche exclusive. Je vous remercie.
Thank you so much for that. And you know, it takes me very neatly into my next series of questions. And I believe we've kind of started to answer, you know, at national level and on the continent, what are some of the solutions? We've talked through some of those things, some very practical examples coming out. I think the role that ISCA will play, standing alongside the AU and the peace and security mechanisms within the AU, could be a very important mechanism. But let's talk about our multilateral systems. And I want to use some examples. Yeah? When the attack happened in Libya and Gaddafi was being taken down, a number of African presidents said, wait, hold. We will fly into Libya and we can have some kind of diplomatic conversations. The feedback from external actors to them was if you fly into Libyan airspace, we cannot guarantee your security. I want you to think about that for a minute, that heads of state of the African continent were told this on our continent. And ladies and gentlemen, what is Libya today? What is Libya today? And it happened on our watch. It happened on our watch. Ladies and gentlemen, Rwanda 1994. Dilly-dallying over the word genocide at the United Nations Security Council saw 1 million people dead in how many days? And who solved the problem? We had to solve the problem. His Excellency and a small force came back in and had to build this country from scratch, ladies and gentlemen. And today we still get lectures and hear lectures about human rights, and there's something wrong. I want to talk about South Africa today. In South Africa today, we are hearing narratives being built around white genocide in South Africa. You are security actors, you understand the import of these narratives, and why are they being placed in the international scene? Why is this happening? What could it open up? Gaza today, ladies and gentlemen, where we've seen the brutalization and the massacre of tens of thousands of children. The multilateral systems, I'm going to come to each of you and ask, are they working? Can they hold? And if they cannot hold, and Africa has never been given an adequate seat at the table, Martin, you can talk about that, perhaps I'm wrong, you can correct me. But where does Africa stand? 54 nations? A strong continent, resource-rich, fastest-growing continent in the world. Where do we deserve to sit? Your Excellency, let me come to you on this, multilateral systems, and how do we maneuver this very serious reality, please?
Écoutez, le multilatéralisme actuel est un multilatéralisme de puissance. Et cela se justifie parce qu'il a résulté de la Seconde Guerre mondiale. Le Conseil de sécurité, ce sont les vainqueurs de la Seconde Guerre mondiale qui ont façonné et continuent de façonner le monde. Pour un continent comme l'Afrique, et laissez-moi revenir sur le triptyque qui a été développé ce matin par le président Kagame. L'appropriation, ownership, la relation entre la gouvernance et la sécurité et la nécessité de la coopération. On ne le dira jamais assez. Les États africains eux-mêmes, parce que l'histoire de ce continent qui a été occupé, les types d'États, les types d'organisations politiques, économiques et sociales héritées du système colonial, est-ce que ces modèles-là peuvent permettre l'appropriation et l'autonomie? Ça, c'est une question qu'on s'est posée et qu'on doit se poser davantage. Deuxièmement, la relation entre la gouvernance et la sécurité. Bien entendu, quel que soit le système que vous aurez choisi, s'il ne rend pas service, s'il n'est pas accepté par cette population, il génère lui-même le phénomène de l'insécurité. Troisièmement, et c'est une évidence, des États africains, nous sommes une cinquantaine actuellement, nous ne pouvons pas, chacun de son côté, pouvoir assurer sa sécurité. D'où la nécessité de la coopération sous-régionale et continentale. Ça, c'est ce triptyque qui est tout à fait logique. Vous avez parlé de la Libye. C'était l'implication de l'Union africaine qui a désigné 5 chefs d'État qui se sont réunis à Nouakchott et qui devraient partir en Libye. Au départ, cela leur a été refusé, quand bien même ce sont des chefs d'État. Il a fallu négocier et renégocier pour qu'ils puissent arriver. Qu'est-ce qui s'est passé en Libye? Kadhafi était prêt à quitter. Il était prêt à quitter. Il l'a dit au chef d'État. Mais malgré ça, l'OTAN est intervenue et allée jusqu'à l'assassiner. Maintenant, 15 ans après, maintenant on voit des procès en France, Sarkozy sur les élections. Voilà, ça c'est une réalité qu'on ne peut pas ne pas regarder en face. Au Rwanda en 1994, ça amène à la question du maintien de la paix, des missions de maintien de la paix en Afrique. On voit un conflit, on va se développer des tendances génocidaires évidentes, on ferme les yeux, on tourne les regards ailleurs. 60 ans après, aujourd'hui, les missions de maintien de la paix des types classiques sont challengées, et c'est une évidence. Mais nous, en tant qu'Africains, est-ce qu'on a réussi? C'est ça la vraie question qu'il faut se poser. Est-ce que le type du modèle qu'on a souvent copié correspond aux exigences qui sont les nôtres? C'est ce qui ramène à l'appropriation. D'abord sur le modèle lui-même d'organisation politique, économique et sociale. Ensuite, sa prestation vis-à-vis de la population pour qu'il soit accepté par cette population. Et se positionner par rapport au reste du monde. Ce qui se passe actuellement sur la question en Afrique du Sud, où des Afrikaners disent qu'on leur a accordé le statut de réfugiés aux États-Unis, c'est quand même... Mais l'histoire est là. Il a fallu un homme comme Mandela pour pouvoir imposer un État arc-en-ciel. Comment les auteurs peuvent être les victimes dans ces circonstances? À qui appartiennent les terres actuellement en Afrique du Sud? À qui appartiennent les terres? Ça, je crois que c'est de notoriété publique. Criminaliser aujourd'hui l'Afrique du Sud, l'ANC, qu'on traite de génocidaires contre les populations, ça, ce n'est pas réaliste. À moins que cela ne cache une autre démarche, mais cela ne me semble pas du tout évident. Donc, je crois qu'il faut être réaliste. Et tout ça, je crois que ça dénote notre faiblesse en tant que continent. Et je crois qu'on veut expérimenter toutes sortes d'idées, et ce qui est absolument inadmissible. C'est une raison de plus pour nous, Africains, je crois que de mesurer l'ampleur et les risques que nous courons. Et cela doit nous engager de faire mieux, de faire le plus rapidement possible.
We need to do better and faster. Martin, let me come to you.
Julie, your questions are very provocative. Let me begin by saying that the multilateral system, as reflected in the United Nations.
Please bring the mic a bit closer.
Yeah. The United Nations was built primarily to prevent great war between the great powers. That's not all it was supposed to do, but this was its primary reason. And for that reason, it needed to have the great powers of the day to stay around the table and to be assured that the United Nations as a political construct would not be used against their vital interests as they saw them. The price of keeping them at the table was to give them the veto. And because of that ability to veto what the rest of the organization thinks or wants to do, and what all countries want or may want to do, it then assures that the permanent members will stay, and then posits that there'll be a possible diplomatic solution from that. In many ways, since we have not had a world war since 1945, you can say that the United Nations arrangement in its most basic terms has succeeded. But it has failed its promise to stop wars elsewhere. And often the veto power has been used to shield the allies and fellow travelers of the great powers when they're committing atrocities. The Security Council has been used as a platform to launch attacks against the very interests of Africa, for instance, the NATO attack on Libya. So what does Africa do in terms of this multilateralism that we belong to? One of the most ironic things about being an African diplomat in the UN is that you're often defending the very system that you're marginalized in. I find that all the time so strange. And I myself have been one of the more ferocious defenders of that system, even while understanding the inequities and marginalizations of my own continent from them. What it means is that the expectation of Security Council reform as a form of favor or an act of inclusion is naive. You do not get included in the permanent ranks of the Security Council to be a substantive member who can wield the veto just because. You have to generate your own form of power and independence so that you sit at that table as an equal. As I like to provoke, you can go to the Security Council permanent membership like a proud peacock, but you may emerge like a plucked chicken. Because the Security Council veto and permanent membership is only one dimension of national power that is arrayed against other intelligence, security, economic, and political powers. So the question for Africa when it comes to multilateralism is to go beyond the demand for inclusion and look inward and talk about the demand for leverage. What is it that allows Africa the leverage to sit in the permanent ranks? What is it that allows Africa to demand a seat at the table and to get it, not because we've been left out, but because of our leverage? And to me, Julie, that comes to coming back to our institutions, our security architectures, reimagining and re-energizing them, coming back to the original reasons we built the African peace and security architecture, being true to that architecture, making sure that the parts of it that have been captured or diverted by others are retaken back into our hands so that we're able to use them. Finally, when it comes to some of those particular emergencies that you talked about, from Gaza to Sudan and elsewhere, it seems to me that it doesn't take 193 members of the UN to decide on anything for the UN to move. What it requires is for a committed group of leaders, 5, 6, less than 10 committed African leaders can shift and change the multilateral system to be more responsive to Africa's definition of its interests. And those interests include the self-determination of the Palestinian people. And that's only because we ourselves are the products of self-determination. We can never turn away from it in principle or even politically. So leverage, leverage, leverage. And that leverage comes from development, development, development. And that development comes from independent thinking and ownership of our own process and our own states.
Thank you so much. Victor, please.
Thank you, Julia. Several brief observations. First of all, the world order which we are living through, which was founded back in 1945, was never meant to be a unipolar world. And that's the reason why you have the Security Council, you have the 5 permanent member states, and each of them have the veto power. Therefore, if you hear any country in the world today saying it is the only surviving hegemon in the world, false, because it does not represent the legitimacy of the international order established back in 1945 after defeating Nazi Germany in the European theater and the Japanese fascism in the Asian Pacific theater. So we should be very proud members in the world community based upon multipolarity and multilateralism centered around the United Nations. Now, in more recent years, especially after the war in Ukraine and more recently the atrocities committed in Gaza against the civilians, we hear a lot of complaints about the inefficiency and the sometimes failure of the United Nations. I agree with all these assessments. On the other hand, I also agree with the ambassador, because let's be the devil's advocate. I think the United Nations has at least achieved in one thing, that is the prevention of the outbreak of another world war ever since 1945. The relations between the General Assembly on the one hand and the Security Council on the other hand, and within the Security Council between those non-permanent member states versus the 5 permanent member states, and for the 5 permanent member states, each with a veto power, the relations, the dynamics are very, very complicated, very, very well-defined sometimes. And sometimes I think the real design is meant for an impasse, because you do not want to see any situation in the world getting out of control from a country-to-country war to become a regional war, and from a regional war to become a total world war again. So I think while we have lots of complaints about the United Nations, we need to take comfort in one thing. That is, it is actually successful in preventing the total outbreak of another world war. Now, what does that leave for Africa, for example? I think 2 things need to be done. First of all, Africa needs to be further consolidated and strengthened. African Union should really be more consolidated so that eventually, I hope personally, for all the Security Council meetings of the United Nations Security Council, there will always be a representative representing Africa. So it is not one of the 15 member states of the Security Council of the United Nations, but African voices need to be fully reflected in the proceedings. And consultation need to be made for African wisdom and leadership, etc. And great leaders in Africa, especially a great leader like President Karami, for example, need to lead Africa and lead the African nation to project the African voices to the United Nations General Assembly on the one hand, and especially in the Security Council. Now, the other thing, allow me to mention, is that while we always talk about securities on the one hand versus development, but these two things are intimately integrated. They cannot be separated. And allow me to warn all of us, we are now already in the middle of this AI revolution, artificial intelligence. I'm very much concerned about the AI divide. And the AI divide will exist between humans, for example, you with very sophisticated chips embedded in your brain, I without, between companies, between governments, between militaries, between cultures, and between civilizations. What we need to do is to really accelerate whatever we do to make sure no country is left behind, especially African countries. When you travel throughout the corners of African continent, you have the worry that Africa is not fully integrated into this AI tsunami, AI revolution. We need to speed up. We need to mobilize all resources. And I think the open source, the AI development, as represented by DeepSeek in China, represents a new trend. That means lower cost, enabling all participants to play a useful role, and African continent and all the African countries have a choice to really play a very significant role. Because otherwise, the real competition may not be between China or the United States or China and Europe. The real competition in the coming years may be AI versus Homo sapien.
Wow.
We need to be prepared, and we need to really speed up. Thank you very much.
Wow, that's very interesting. And for security stakeholders, somewhere to dive in. Mark, please, go ahead.
Le multilatéralisme est un grand mot, un grand concept qui a fait rêver. Effectivement, on pense immédiatement au système onusien, né après la Deuxième Guerre mondiale, mais qui immédiatement, quelques années plus tard, a déjà été freiné par le déclenchement de la guerre froide, qui a très largement paralysé à plusieurs reprises le Conseil de sécurité. Ensuite, il y a eu une nouvelle phase post-guerre froide où l'on a cru à nouveau à ce grand rêve multilatéral avec une capacité de grande puissance à pacifier les relations internationales. Et c'est vrai qu'aujourd'hui, on revient à cette situation de compétition stratégique, de compétition de puissance que je décrivais dans mes remarques préliminaires, qui fait que le système multilatéral, le système onusien, a à nouveau du plomb dans l'aile, si je puis m'exprimer ainsi, c'est-à-dire de grandes difficultés. Et on voit déjà que le Conseil de sécurité a été bloqué à plusieurs reprises par des vétos au cours des derniers mois, des dernières années. Maintenant, il faut voir aussi que les agences onusiennes ont des grandes difficultés, des difficultés financières notamment. Et c'est vrai que quand on voit de grands membres du Conseil de sécurité contester l'ordre international tel qu'il a été construit post-Deuxième Guerre mondiale, cela crée évidemment des problèmes qui paraissent insolubles. Maintenant, le multilatéralisme, ce n'est pas que ça. On ferait mieux de parler des multilatéralismes au pluriel. Il y a d'autres organisations, la francophonie par exemple, mais il y en a d'autres. Et je crois que là, ce qui va se passer dans les prochaines années, c'est soit une période attentiste où dans le fond le système onusien risque d'être de plus en plus bloqué, soit un effort d'imagination, d'innovation, de empowerment, je n'ai pas le terme en français, peut-être que vous me le donnerez tout à l'heure, des organisations multilatérales autres qui existent, des formats multilatéraux autres qui existent. On les appelle parfois minilatéraux, on parle parfois de multilatéralisme régional, et là ça nous permettra sans doute d'avoir de nouvelles perspectives. Maintenant, j'aimerais quand même dire un mot sur la Libye, parce que ça a été mentionné par deux personnes. C'est évidemment une situation très compliquée, et je crois que les historiens, quand les archives seront ouvertes, pourront aussi faire leur travail, et on sait que ça prend du temps pour avoir cette possibilité pour les historiens de faire leur travail. Mais du point de vue français, on s'est quand même retrouvé dans une situation où il y avait eu des révolutions dans plusieurs pays du monde arabe, où l'instabilité s'était développée considérablement en Libye et où le dirigeant en place promettait de mater la révolution, son propre fils expliquant que des rivières de sang allaient couler. Quand on voit les blindés avancer vers Benghazi, qui était le principal fief des rebelles, qu'est-ce qu'on fait? Est-ce qu'on regarde ailleurs en se disant que ce sont des problèmes de souveraineté? Ou est-ce qu'on essaye d'intervenir? Est-ce que la notion de responsabilité de protéger a un sens ou pas? Moi, je veux bien qu'on critique des interventions, mais il faudrait aussi essayer de faire un peu de contrefactuel pour se demander ce qui se serait passé s'il n'y avait pas eu l'intervention.
I'm going to be
Julie,
the devil's
you mind me
advocate.
coming in a
Yes,
bit?
okay, you can start. Thank you. Go ahead, Mark. Very quickly, and then I do want to come to the floor for a few contributions, not questions, because our time is very tight.
Yeah, I just want to take that one example of Libya and see what are the possibilities of when I talk about leverage, so that I say something that's a bit of a solution. There were 3 African countries in the Security Council at the time of that decision. If you go back and look at how they voted and why they voted the way they voted, you will then see that they did not have a consensus as the 3 of them. And you then ask the African 3 on the Security Council, what is it that can make them strong enough to maneuver in that moment? And between that time and today, the African 3 has changed a lot. And that change has been, one, the deepening integration of the Africa 3 to the African Union. So when you're sitting in the Security Council and you're one of the African 3, if you get a very clear signal from the Peace and Security Council of the African Union, it emboldens you a great deal for you to say, look, I would like to do what you're telling me to do, but unfortunately, the African Peace and Security Council has decided, so our hands are tied. Sometimes even when Chair Moussa Faki would speaking for the Commission, but because the Peace and Security Council is quiet, we would use his words to say as if, Moussa, you are talking for the whole of Africa. And we would try and use that as a leverage point. We then had a unity with the CARICOM states, which was called the A3+, when St. Vincent came in and said, on the basis of Pan-Africanism, if the 3 of African countries agree on any issue, we will automatically vote for them. The difference between 3 members and 4 members in the Security Council is considerable. Now imagine a strong Peace and Security Council of Africa that is independent, that is decisive, that makes clear decisions in a timely way. Then next imagine that Africa has a criteria for the candidates for the African 3 on the Security Council. Not just regional circulation, but you're coming there with capabilities, you're coming there with determination, you're coming there with a track record of pursuing African interests. So if those 3 were put forward by Africa of that nature, who could combine with CARICOM, who can talk on the basis of peace and security decisions, believe me, you will often see China and others in Security Council automatically side with the African 3. You may not have a veto in terms of the law of the charter, but many, many times when you have that leverage, you have a de facto veto. So all is not lost. It's just a question of fixing 1 or 2 things decisively, and we can change a lot about how multilateralism works.
Thank you. Thank you for injecting the hope. As I come to the floor,
Just one word
yes,
on Libye.
Please, Your Excellency.
Sincèrement, 14 ans après l'intervention de l'OTAN en Libye, jusqu'aujourd'hui, il n'y a même pas un gouvernement unique dans ces pays. 14 ans après, 5 chefs d'État ont été désignés. Ils se sont rendus à Tripoli pour convaincre Kadhafi, ils se sont rendus à Benghazi. Ça, ce sont des faits. Il était possible d'arrêter la guerre en Libye. Les Américains l'ont reconnu par la suite, les Français l'ont reconnu, les Anglais l'ont reconnu, que c'était une erreur monumentale. Quel a été le résultat? Immédiatement, les arsenaux libyens se sont déversés dans le Sahel. Moi, je suis du Tchad. J'étais ministre des Affaires étrangères en ce moment. Feu le président Déby a envoyé les gens des services à la frontière libyenne. Ils ont acheté toutes sortes d'armes avec quelques dollars, y compris des SAM-7, des armes pour tirer sur les avions. Ces arsenaux se sont déversés et la plus grande aujourd'hui partie qui est impactée négativement par le terrorisme et l'intégrisme violent, c'est le Sahel. Voilà ce qui s'est passé en Libye. Ce sont des faits. Bien sûr, les historiens vont y revenir, mais personne aujourd'hui ne peut convaincre. Surtout que la Libye, jusqu'à aujourd'hui, 14 ans après, la Libye est un non-État. Ça, c'est une évidence aussi.
Thank you. I'm not a security expert by any means, but as I come to the floor, you can clap. You can clap for His Excellency. As I come to the floor, as an African, in response to your Libya comments, I just have a few questions. They don't need to be answered, but they need to be asked. Who will write the history? Who will write the history of what happened in Libya? Africa must. Africa must write its own history. Maybe others will do the same, but already you are hearing from His Excellency Moussa Faki what they saw. What was the role of Africa and African leaders, and why could international actors not give them the respect of sitting at the table with African leaders? That was the least that could have been done. You know, what is the standard of living for Libyans today? Is it better today than it was before the attack? Is Libya secure today? Are the neighbors of Libya secure today? And the final question, who earns from Libya's resources? Libya was a wealthy nation, oil producing. Who earns today? Do we know in this room where Libya's money goes? Africa. Africa. We have to ask the questions. We must. Let me please come to the floor. We'll try to take 4 comments, and then I'm going to come to a final question with a panel to look at unity, solidarity for Africa. There are mics on the side, so if you have a question, gentlemen over here, please, you can go that way. There's another gentleman, did I see? Yes, in uniform here at the front. Anyone on this side? I think there's a Senegal delegation who had requested to ask a question as well. The 3 of you can start. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much for you and your panelists. My name is Khalid Moussa. I'm the chargé to affairs of Sudan. It is undisputable fact that the biggest crisis, humanitarian crisis and security crisis in Africa, in Sudan right now, when you have 13 million people displaced, 5 million refugees, and there is a war crime committed in the country. I do appreciate by the government of Sudan what the former Commissioner of Africa, Mr. Moussa Faki, did. Regardless, the crisis in Sudan reflects the institutional weakness of Africa. It is a dark spot in the conscience of Africa. That because for the second consecutive years, it's still going on, Africa doesn't do anything for the Sudanese people when we see the suffering. And when we talk about owning the resolution for African problem, this is a clear weakness and a spot on the conscience of Africa. The main point I would like to deliver, which will affect all African countries, is about the paramilitary problem in Africa. Right now, RSF in Sudan, using Chinese drones, operated by Colombian mercenaries in Sudan, launching from neighboring countries. And more than that, nobody is talking about that at all. Funded by regional power, and Africa is silent, international community is silent, Sudanese people, they don't have anybody to support on that regard. Where is Africa? Where is international community? And in the panel, only one person mentioned Sudan, where it is the biggest humanitarian crisis in Africa right now. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for those comments. I will bring that back to the panel. I will bring that back to the panel. There was a gentleman here. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, moderator, and good morning, everybody. I would like here to thank the panelists for the rich insight they give us. I'm Brigadier General Famouki Kamara from Mali. I have to convey here the great warmings of my Chief of Defense for that invitation we had and that opportunity to expose here the case of Mali. The case of Mali is really a study case which can help all Africa, because the case of Mali is the consequence of the intervention in Libya. So we will not be able to rewrite the history. So I would like to elaborate on 3 points. The 3 points which are the main problems in Africa generally. The first problem is the lack of political and strategical coherence. Clausewitz, a great strategist, has said we need to have always that trinity between the people, the government, and the army. And unfortunately, that's not a reality because of the lack of vision and narratives. Who is the adversary? Who is the enemy? Sometimes it's misinterpreted, but done on purpose. Also, there is a lack of complementarity, a lack of synergy between the national elements of power. I mean here, diplomacy, economy, military, and so on. The second point is, that was at the domestic level, but the second point is at the international level, which influence, of course, the domestic level. It's the foreign interference through bilateral and multilateral channels. It goes through hinderings of the ownership of the assessment as well as the ownership of decision-making process. The priorities are most of the time dictated, or the assessment is made by external actors, like the fight against imperialism, neocolonialism. We all know that all states are driven by interest. So the approach, predatory approach, is kind of hindering Africa development. We have Bakan, we have ECOWAS. Sometimes you ask yourself, what is the objective? And the last point is the lack of reliable and credible strategic partner, which is very important. Africa sometimes is considered as a far or near enemy, which is a problem. We consider the partnership as a partner, but the partner in return is considered us as a far or near enemy because of his interests. Last but not least also, it's the improvement of the military equipment. I mean military and security equipments. They have all kinds of obstacles so that people cannot, countries cannot get it in order to ensure their security. To conclude, I will say there is nothing new under the sun. And some great authors, anti-colonialists, Frantz Fanon has said, each generation has to discover in a relative secrecy its mission, to fulfill it or to betray it. And in that case, the Sahel state alliances has discovered its mission, which is sovereignty, to gain the sovereignty, to contribute to the international peace and security. And also, the Sahel state also is convinced that each country counts at the international stage, either at a stake or as an actor. The Sahel state alliances has decided to be an actor, will not be a margins. And we will do that by equipping ourselves with that relative power, as another great author said, Serge Sur, the power is the capacity to do, to have done, to refuse to do, and to prevent to do. So we are doing that by rejecting external interference in our mission of sovereignty. Also, we have to do that through connecting with credible and favorable partnership, and we refuse to do it by cooperation, and last but not least, we prevent to do it because attacking any state of Sahel state alliances is attacking all the state of Sahel alliances. We need courage, I will leave with
Thank
just
you.
question.
Thank you, sir.
Please, just one question.
No, you might be a great politician one day. No, but I have to stop you. We don't have time.
Okay.
Thank you so much, sir.
It's-
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'm coming back to the panel. Thank you. And I'm so sorry, just because of time, it's been such a rich conversation, but we do need to wind up. Before I come to each of your comments, just with a final contribution, Mark and Victor, from your end, and Martin and Your Excellency, I'll be looking to you for comments on solidarity, how Africa really builds our unity, yeah? But before that, Your Excellency, I wanted your comment on Sudan. It is a huge humanitarian crisis. It appears it's a proxy war. How does Africa just respond, contain? What is the way forward?
Je crois que le frère soudanais a parfaitement raison. Ce qui se passe au Soudan est dramatique. Il est extrêmement grave et certainement que l'Afrique n'a pas fait suffisamment peut-être. Mais je voudrais tout juste rappeler que dans mes anciennes fonctions en tant que président de la Commission de l'Union africaine, 10 jours après le renforcement du président al-Béchir, je me suis déplacé à Khartoum, où j'ai rencontré les militaires dans toutes leurs composantes, y compris les RSF, la classe politique, la société civile, et nous avons mis en place une équipe qui a aidé les différentes forces politiques, sociales et militaires à arriver à l'accord de août 2019, qui a mis en place une transition avec un gouvernement civil dirigé par Dr Abdallah Hamdok. En octobre 2021, les militaires, ce qui veut dire Al-Burhan et son adjoint, le général Himeti, ont fait un coup d'État et renversé le gouvernement civil. Ce qui a amené l'Union africaine à suspendre le Soudan de ses activités. C'est ça ce qui s'est passé exactement. Quand la guerre a commencé, après la suspension du Soudan, je me suis rendu moi-même 3 fois à Khartoum pour discuter avec les militaires qui sont aux affaires pour pouvoir réengager le processus de transition. Et en avril, c'est la guerre entre les 2 généraux, le président et son vice-président. Je rappelle que quand même RSF est une milice, mais qui a été légalisée par le gouvernement soudanais comme force appartenant à l'armée soudanaise. C'est ça la réalité dans ce qui s'est passé dans le pays. Et donc, les ingérences extérieures sont manifestes aujourd'hui au Soudan. Quand les 2 parties utilisent des drones, utilisent des avions de guerre, un arsenal inimaginable, les ingérences extérieures sont connues, elles sont notoires et elles se développent. Au même moment, nous avons engagé un processus politique en essayant de ramener les forces civiles et militaires pour pouvoir discuter à Addis. C'est ouvert un autre processus à Jeddah, en Arabie Saoudite, pour un cessez-le-feu. Malheureusement, tout ceci n'a rien amené et la guerre s'est développée. Aujourd'hui, nous assistons à une réelle catastrophe humanitaire. Ce qui est plus choquant, c'est qu'aujourd'hui, tout le monde le sait, ce sont des forces extérieures qui, avec leurs moyens, alimentent cette guerre qui a pris une proportion inimaginable et des millions de Soudanais sont soit réfugiés, soit déplacés. L'Union africaine a essayé de faire de son mieux. Elle n'a pas les capacités ni politiques ni diplomatiques. Même les partis, il faut les reconnaître, parfois privilégient, peut-être pour des raisons qui leur sont propres, les forces extérieures, que ce soit sur le plan politique, diplomatique, plus que les institutions régionales comme l'IGAD ou l'Union africaine. Mais vous avez parfaitement raison, c'est une situation inacceptable et il faut que tous les efforts soient faits pour que la paix revienne. Il faut que les partis acceptent le dialogue. Il faut qu'ils acceptent le dialogue pour arrêter cette hémorragie qui fragilise un grand pays, le Soudan. Personne n'a pensé, moi personnellement, c'est un pays que je connais bien, personne n'a pensé que le Soudan allait rentrer dans une déflagration de cette nature. Et la menace la plus grave, c'est que les ingérences extérieures sont de plus en plus notoires et au grand jour, et personne ne dit rien. Ça, c'est extrêmement inquiétant pour le reste, même de la sécurité dans le continent africain.
Thank you for that. This needs to be a major focus for the African continent moving forward. Mark, final comments, please.
Oui, c'est pas simple de synthétiser, mais j'aimerais dire qu'effectivement, il y a un coût à l'intervention qui peut être très lourd. Il peut aussi avoir un coût très lourd à la non-intervention. Les pays occidentaux ont aussi été pointés du doigt pour n'être pas intervenus en Syrie, par exemple. Et on voit qu'il y a eu une guerre civile qui a fait des centaines de milliers de morts. Donc ce sont des situations évidemment tragiques et il faut essayer de tirer les leçons à la fois des interventions qui ont échoué en partie et de la non-intervention qui peut aussi être très coûteuse. Maintenant, ça a été clairement exprimé, encore une fois, cette volonté de davantage africaniser la sécurité, d'avoir des solutions africaines aux problèmes africains. Et je pense encore une fois que là, il n'y a pas de contradiction dans les termes avec la position des pays européens et plus largement probablement de certains pays occidentaux. Maintenant, il faut savoir comment faire et puis il faut réussir à le faire. Et je crois, et ce sera mon dernier mot, qu'il faut aussi, ça a aussi été d'ailleurs une tendance chez nous, mesurer des dynamiques internes qui peuvent exister. Il y a des acteurs externes qui peuvent effectivement parfois nourrir des dynamiques, mais souvent ces instabilités, elles ne viennent pas directement de l'extérieur, c'est-à-dire que ça accentue des dynamiques internes qui sont préexistantes et des problèmes qu'il faut résoudre pour éviter de développer l'instabilité et pour éviter de susciter ces interventions externes.
Thank you for that. Victor, please.
Well, I'm saddened by the wars and the sufferings in countries like the Sudan and Mali and quite a few other African countries, which are plagued by not only civil wars but also cross-border wars of all kinds. I hope the African nations and African Union will have enough wisdom to come up with a framework where these wars, civil war or cross-border wars, can be not only timely be monitored, but also effective measures can be proposed so that they can be brought to an end more swiftly, and then it will not be allowed to escalate or spread over to more people, because otherwise the human sufferings in Africa will really take a great toll, and without stability, it is really difficult to expect that development can take great roots in any meaningful way. So security, peace, development are all intricately related to war or conflict, civil war, instability, etc. That's number one. Now, allow me to make a final point. I was in Doha on May the 14th, attending the Arab Strategy Forum, just on the eve of President Trump's state visit to UAE, and I made a proposal, and I want to make the same proposal now on this occasion. I said, Mr. President, President Trump, don't mess with free trade. Free trade is important. Free trade is important for all African countries. Without free trade, you cannot expect to achieve meaningful economic development. And without achieving meaningful economic development, your security will be eroded. It will not be established on solid rock foundations. Again, these things are all related. We need to do our best to promote peace, stability, and development for all African countries. And then this will re-enhance the security dimension for Africa as a whole and for each of the 54 African nations separately. That's my best hope.
Thank you
today,
so much.
I hope you will declare me as an African. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And I think that's a reminder also of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area and our responsibility to really bring that to life. That will be a big part of enabling peace and security on the continent. Martin, please.
Yeah, well, I could just answer with one sentence, but I'll increase a bit. Solidarity is for the courageous. You can never have the solidarity of cowards. And so what is the basis of our courage? You know, when you read about revolutions in your history books and when you're in class, they look very tidy. When you read about 1789 in France or 1917 in Russia, it appears very, very simple, very, It almost one thing leads to another. It seems very logical. When you're living through a revolution, it's very confusing. And you don't know exactly what is happening and what's about to happen, because many of the things you've assumed to be permanent turn out to actually be like clouds in the sky. And I think we're in one of those moments. Today, the multipolar world is appearing, not for the first time. The world has mostly been multipolar, but it is reappearing. Many of us are trained to think in a unipolar world since the 1990s, depending on your age. So to think in a multipolar world is not easy. Next, the weaponization of trade and investment is underway. These rivalries are not just rivalries for political primacy or civilizational primacy, even though they are that, but they're also claims for economic supremacy and a defense of economic gains that they have. So to me, solidarity for Africa looks like taking the instruments we have and the resources we have to understand that cold water has been poured on our face and that the link between foreign aid and development has been broken. If you haven't broken it in your mind, I encourage you to.
Wow.
Now, it means all we have is what we have. Partnerships can come later. And so the instruments we have built, they're all we have, and they are sufficient. For example, the African Free Trade Area, which we think of as trade, and the African Peace Security Architecture, which we think of as peace and security. In fact, the two need to become fused so that peace and security become about building energy and infrastructure corridors with our neighbors so that we're more peaceful with our neighbors. So we come together to suppress militias that are destabilizing Eastern Congo. Why? Because we want to build an East African corridor that has energy, manufacturing, infrastructure, and security. We have the instruments, we just have to imagine how to fuse them. And then we have to find, to come back to my first point, the courageous leaders who give this the breadth and the space that it requires. We have all the instruments. All that's remaining in our mind, or is blocking us, is our imaginations and illusions that the world is coming to rescue Africa. It never was, and it's not now, and it never will. We are the only people who can do it for ourselves.
Wow, wow, wow. Thank you. Your Excellency, you have the final word.
Je prends la dernière phrase de mon frère l'ambassadeur Kamani. Je crois que la première des choses, le défi est d'abord interne aux États africains, à nos sociétés elles-mêmes. Il faut s'approprier ses problèmes, il faut s'approprier son destin. Ça, c'est la première étape, interne. Bien gouverner nos États, nos sociétés. Parce que pour avoir l'adhésion des populations, il faut qu'elles soient convaincues du type de gouvernance avec la justice, l'égalité à l'intérieur des États. C'est ça qui renforce le leadership et qui donne la crédibilité nécessaire. Ensuite, la solidarité intra-africaine. Il ne faut pas, quand il y a des menaces au Sahel, que les autres tournent les regards, c'est comme si de rien ne s'est passé. J'ai souvenance en 2014. Je me suis rendu à Thessalite parce que les troupes tchadiennes étaient à Thessalite avec les Nations Unies quand les premiers kamikazes ont sauté sur les troupes tchadiennes. Quand je suis revenu à Bamako, j'étais parti de Bamako, je disais au ministre des Affaires étrangères, dont le président Bazoum en son temps était ministre des Affaires étrangères, si on ne paye pas attention, ces gens qui explosent à Thessalite vont venir dans nos capitales. Un an après, jusqu'à N'Djamena a été attaqué. Ouagadougou, Bamako. Il ne faut pas tourner les regards, ce sont des évidences. Et seul un État ou deux États ne peuvent pas y faire face. Il faut qu'il y ait une solidarité de l'ensemble du continent quand il y a un problème. En 2019, ici, dans une salle à côté, avec le président Youssoufou, qui était en son temps président de la République du Niger, nous discutions de cette question avec le président Kagame. Le président Kagame était le seul chef d'État à sortir $1 million au bénéfice du G5 Sahel, comme geste de solidarité. C'est ces réflexes-là qu'il faut développer. C'est ces réflexes-là qu'il faut développer. C'est ça la solidarité. Ensuite, bien entendu, nous n'allons pas vivre en autarcie. Nous devrons coopérer avec le reste du monde, mais sur la base d'intérêts bien connus et réciproques. Donc, la balle est d'abord dans notre camp. Je crois 60 ans après, 65 ans après les indépendances des années 60, il y a lieu de faire une évaluation critique sur tous les plans. S'assumer, surtout que le monde change. L'ambassadeur vient parler de l'intelligence artificielle, mais nous risquons de rater encore cette révolution. Ce serait extrêmement grave. Donc, vraiment, le moment est grave, il faut agir rapidement et en toute intelligence.
Wow. Thank you so much. What an incredible conversation, and not an easy one, but an important one. I want to thank all the panelists. I'm just going to finish by reminding us that, many of our cultures believe in the spirit of Ubuntu. So it's very easy for us to lean back into that. I am because you are. That mutual respect stands within many of our communities. In Kenya, we have something called Harambee. How many of you have heard about this, the Harambee principle? And if you haven't, thank you, I see a couple of hands. The Harambee principle is when we strive together, we achieve much. When you stand alongside each other, you have extra vigor, energy, and you push harder. And so we have a lot within our own communities, our principles, that we can tap into to give power to African solidarity. Allow me to end with a quote from a great African leader. I can see no security for African states unless African leaders have realized beyond all doubt that the solution of Africa lies in African unity. That was Kwame Nkrumah. Kwame Nkrumah, how many years ago? And so as I look at this room and the power in this room, and many who are watching on screens in different parts of the continent and the world, as Africans, what are you going to do about this? Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.